This is Kevin Harrington, original shark from Shark Tank, inventor of the infomercial, and you're listening to Jamy Bechler from Success is a Choice.
Providing insights to help you grow your business, improve yourself, and add value to those around you. You're listening to the Success is a Choice podcast, where you get a peek into the lives of industry leaders as they share their stories with you.
Welcome to Success is a Choice podcast. I'm your host, Jamy Bechler. And today we have a very special guest as Amy Morin joins us. She is an internationally best-selling author of the book 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. This book has been translated into 29 different languages. She also recently came out with another book entitled 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do. As an author and licensed psychotherapist, Amy is a frequent guest and source for many podcasts, TV shows, and articles. She's also a regular columnist for Forbes, Inc. magazine, and Psychology Today. We're very honored to have Amy Morin on the podcast today. Amy, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Well, you gave a TED Talk a few years ago. In general, what was it like to be on stage and give a TED Talk? But furthermore, as you think about that TED Talk, it's one of the all-time biggest viewed TED Talks of all time. It's nearing 6 million people that have watched your talk online. What are your thoughts about that as well?
It's crazy to think that many people have seen it. I can't even fathom what 6 million people would look like if you put them in an audience. So it's crazy to think that many people have viewed it over the years, but I'm honored. And giving a TED Talk, it was definitely different than giving a regular talk. I speak to other groups sometimes, but there's more pressure when you know it's going to live on the internet forever and ever. So you think, okay, if I mess this up or I've only got one shot, here goes nothing. But I really just wanted to try to focus on the audience that was in front of me and to speak to them and then hope that it would catch on online. And I'm so grateful that it did.
When you speak to other audiences sometimes, do you like to move around a lot? And did you feel, really what I'm getting at is you kind of had to stay in place when you do a TED Talk. You stay in that little circle. How did that make you feel, just staying in a circle and not, you couldn't see the audience, is that right?
Yeah, so it was in a theater that was pitch black, so I couldn't see anything, which was different as well. Normally the lighting is a little bit different, so you can at least tell if people smile or if they're looking at you, and you kind of get a feel for the audience. So that was different. And also they had told us in the beginning that the camera was rather fixed, and so they basically said don't move around too much, and you only get this little red dot anyway to stand on. And so I didn't move my feet for the entire 15-minute talk. They were planted in one spot, which is tough to do sometimes when you're used to moving about the stage and walking to one end of the stage to talk to that audience and moving to the other end of the stage. So so that was different too. My energy was a little bit different that day.
That's a unique experience, not being able to see the audience reaction necessarily and having to stand in one place. Great talk. I definitely encourage the people to go watch that, and we'll put that definitely in the show notes. Your book, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, is an international bestseller. Why did you name it as you did instead of just saying mentally strong? These are things that mentally strong people do.
As a therapist, I had been taught, okay, you need to build on people's strengths, meet people where they are, tell them what they're doing well, and sort of cheer them on and help them to keep doing more of those good habits. And over the years, I realized, okay, that's helpful, but perhaps I'm also doing people a disservice. I had a lot of people that came into my therapy office who were more resilient than others, or they'd get better faster, or they would seem to go through these hardships and then bounce back better than other people. And I realized it wasn't always about what they did. Sometimes it was more about what they didn't do. And I started to think about it, and I thought, if I wanted to get into physical shape and I went to meet with a personal trainer and they told me to work out more, well, that would be helpful, but it's only helpful to a point. If they didn't also say, hey, by the way, you should change your diet, then all that energy I'd put into going to the gym might not be all that helpful in the end. But if they just said, hey, you also need to change your eating habits, then working out would become much more effective. And I realized, okay, if I really want to help people in becoming better at what they're doing already, if I want to make their good habits more effective, I also have to talk about what not to do. And so sort of over the years, I realized that it only took a couple of bad habits and to really hold people back. And if they could get rid of those habits, it would make their good habits much more effective, and they'd get better faster.
So as you wrote this book, and we've talked about the TED Talk, and you give speeches all over the country and interviews all over the country, different things like that. One of the reasons we should listen to you is because you have all these letters after your name, and you're licensed, this and that, and you're an expert. But more than that, you're completely different in that you actually have a unique story, and that most of us don't have. And these life experiences are kind of why we should listen to your advice and read these books and really take notice of what you're saying, because it's not just theory, it's real life. Tell us a little bit, walk us through this journey that you've had to get to where you're at now.
Well, originally I thought, okay, my goal in life is to teach other people about mental strength. And early on in my career, I thought, great, I went to college and I'm now going to impart my wisdom on other people and help them become mentally strong. But I quickly learned, okay, perhaps I also need to work on this myself. When I was 23, my mother had passed away suddenly from a brain aneurysm. And she and I had been very close. And it was one of those things where she was healthy and she was fine one minute and then she was gone the next. And to wrap my brain around how that could happen and to figure out how do you go through grief and how do you heal from that and how do you go on and still have a good life. And even though I was an adult, there were still lots of things that I had assumed my mother would be there for later in life. And so it was my first big experience with loss. And I had seen people come into my therapy office who had lost somebody maybe 20 years ago, and they just felt like they were never able to find joy or happiness or contentment again in life. And so I knew I didn't want that to happen. And so I worked really hard on figuring out how do you go through tough times and come out better and stronger on the other side. And it took a long time before I started to feel like I was getting life back to some sort of normal without my mother in it. And then on the 3-year anniversary of when my mother died, my 26-year-old husband died of a heart attack. And to say it was painful is an understatement. The only words I could really even come up with is that it hurt to breathe for a long time, to figure out now I'm a 26-year-old widow and I don't have my mom. Where do I go from here? And I was reminded that a lot of the things that are helpful in tough times is not about what you do, but it's also about what you don't do. And I worked really hard on myself. I took as much time off from being a therapist as I could because I knew that I wouldn't be able to be an effective therapist when I was brokenhearted, and took a long time to sort of, for the fog from all of that grief to lift and to figure out what am I going to do with my life. And it was a few years down the road that I was fortunate enough to fall in love again. And I got remarried and decided to sort of get a fresh start in life with a new house, a new job, a new area. And pretty quickly after all of that, and I sort of had this fresh start, my father-in-law got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I remember just thinking, this isn't fair. Finally, something good happened, and now something bad has to happen. I have to lose another loved one. Why do these things always have to keep happening? And in the midst of that, I was reminded again that thinking like that isn't helpful, that we knew my father-in-law had maybe a couple of months, but probably more like a few weeks left. And sitting around and feeling sorry for myself wasn't going to be helpful throughout it all. So I sat down and I wrote a list of all the things mentally strong people don't do. And when I was done, I had 13 things on the list, and I thought, okay, I'm just going to read over this list to remind myself, don't do these certain things. And at some point in the process, I thought, all right, if this list is helpful to me, maybe it would be helpful to somebody else. And I published it online, and never imagined it would be read by millions of people, but it was. It went viral, and it's been read now by more than 50 million people. And within a couple of weeks of writing it, the media was calling. I was on Fox News, and Forbes put me on an on-camera interview, and everybody was talking about this list, and they had assumed I had written the list because I had conquered it, that I had become mentally strong, that I never had to worry about these things. But what they didn't know is that I wrote it because I struggled with these things myself. And in fact, I was on national TV talking about mental strength just 4 days after my father-in-law passed away. But it wasn't until I wrote the book that I sort of gave backstory of, hey, by the way, it's not that I just know these things as a therapist, but it's also because I lived it. And these are the bad habits that I think we're all prone to sometimes, but that they keep us stuck if we let ourselves engage in them.
You know, you've gone through a lot of tragedy and grief and stuff, and I'm just curious, what would be your advice for not the people going through it, but the people around you? Because it's always kind of awkward or weird, or you don't know how to interact with a person that's just gone through that. Would you have any suggestions for that?
Oh, that's a great question, because I think it is incredibly awkward. People don't know what to say. They don't know what to do. And because of that, sometimes people avoid somebody, and that's not helpful at all. And because I think a lot of people, when they're grieving, they feel abandoned, or when they're going through hard times and nobody calls, then they think nobody cares. So I think even if you don't know what to say, you can just say that. Say, I don't really know what to say to you right now. But to be willing to sit with somebody when they're sad, and without trying to cheer them up. Our tendency sometimes is to make jokes or to try to make sure other people are okay, but because it's tough to sit with somebody who's sad. But sometimes that's the best thing you can do, is let somebody know it's okay to be sad, and I'll still be here for you. And so, of course, the words "I'm sorry" are about the best I think we've come up with, is to say I'm sorry for your loss, and then we, as out of habit, sometimes say, let me know if there's anything that I can do. But make sure that that isn't just lip service, but that you actually call somebody and say, what can I do for you today? And sometimes people don't know what you can do, but sometimes it's just as simple as giving them a kind ear, or sitting with them, or letting them know you don't even have to talk. You can sit in silence too. That's fine.
Well, you mentioned that the book was as much for you as it was for anyone else, but it certainly could help other people. What have you found that's maybe the one or two things on that list that are still kind of the hardest things for you to wrap your mind around and to be mentally tough when it comes to struggles and hardships?
Again, I think all 13 of them are things I still do occasionally. And now that I've written about it and talked about it so much over the years, I'm much more aware of it. And I remind myself not to do it. But if I had to pick a couple, I would say not to fear taking calculated risks, to get out there and say, okay, I'm gonna get out there and do things, even when it's scary, and to know that, at this point, what's the worst that can happen, and to put yourself out there and take big risks is okay. And I guess another one would be, don't focus on things that I can't control. There's so few things in life that we actually have control over, and to be able to give that up. And I still find myself at times thinking, oh, I wish I could do this, or I wish that would happen, but that's a waste of time and a waste of energy. So to just put your energy into the things that I can control, and that can help me to be much more effective and productive.
Well, a lot of us like to go to parties, but pity parties seem to be something that we enjoy going to. We like to have little pity parties for ourselves. What can we do to avoid that?
Well, I think the first thing is to just recognize when you are engaging in self-pity, and to know that it's good to be sad. Being sad can be really healing, but when you go beyond just feeling sad and you start thinking, nobody understands this, or my problems are worse than anybody else's, that's when it crosses over into self-pity, and that's not helpful. So to recognize it, and then when you start getting in that mode, I think gratitude can be one of the best ways to pull yourself out of it, to remind yourself that no matter how bad your life is, it's actually not that bad. And to just think about all the little things in life that you have to be grateful for, and all the things that you have to be thankful for, whether it's just the sun is shining today, or I have shoes to put on my feet. There's people all over the planet that wish that they had some of those things in life that we can so easily take for granted.
I hope that you are enjoying this interview with Amy Morin. If so, then we have a great deal for you. Our friends at Audible are offering our listeners a free audiobook download of Amy's book, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. You could also pick up her other book, 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do. Our friends at Audible are offering this free download in a 30-day free trial membership by going to audibletrial.com/success is a choice. Once again, that's audibletrial.com/success is a choice to pick up Amy's books. And now, back to our interview with Amy Morin. Well, speaking of gratitude, I speak to a lot of companies and organizations on culture and creating a championship culture. And you recently wrote an article for Forbes talking about how you can have a better workplace culture just with kind of an attitude of gratitude or showing gratitude a little bit more. Genuine thank yous. How can we do better in this area of gratitude, whether it's personally or in our workplace?
Well, I think in the workplace especially, there's often things like the appreciation days for, the secretary, the receptionist, the front desk staff, stuff like that. And then companies will fall into we'll get everybody flowers that day, or they give everybody a gift card at the holidays or something like that. But those things don't really genuinely make people feel appreciated, because it's sort of like something being done out of obligation. But I think for a leader to just sometimes have a conversation with somebody and give them a genuine thank you, I really appreciate that you went above and beyond, or I'm so grateful that you spoke up in the meeting today. Those little conversations and that come from the heart, I think, can have a huge impact. And I think it's the same in our personal life, that just writing somebody a thank you note, not because you feel obligated because they bought you a gift and you're sending thank you notes to everybody that gave you a gift, but sometimes just a friend, a neighbor, a relative who maybe you appreciate in your life for one reason or another. Maybe they're a kind person or they give you good advice sometimes, but to just give them a genuine thank you, it does a lot for you as the giver, and it does a lot for them when they receive that thank you. I mean, there's tons of research on gratitude and all the wonderful benefits it can have for your physical health as well as your psychological health. And I think it's just one of those really simple things. It doesn't cost anything. It only takes a few minutes of your time, but it can have huge benefits.
Well, you recently wrote a new book, 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do. Why did you write this book, and kind of give us a snapshot of it?
Well, the biggest question I kept getting from readers of my first book was, how do we teach kids how to be mentally strong? And I could have just written a kid's book, sort of a companion guide, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to write the book for parents so that parents could become mental strength coaches, because it's not just something your child's going to read a book, put it down, and then be mentally strong. It's something that kids need to practice, and parents are the ones who are right there in the most teachable moments with kids. And so I wrote this book in hopes that parents would learn how to teach kids the skills that they need so that they can grow up to become the mentally strong people who don't do those things I talked about in the first book. But and I had some parents who would say, I printed off the list and I hung it on my child's bedroom door so that I told them, hey, don't do these 13 things. But that's not really the way that kids are going to learn. Kids really need hands-on teaching and coaching. And I wanted parents to know, okay, that some of today's common parenting habits that we all do at one time or another are robbing kids of mental strength. And if you want to raise a child who's going to be resilient and ready to tackle the challenges of the world, you have to give up some of those things, even if it's not popular, but that in the long run, your child will benefit.
So has there been one or two things from that book or that list that you've gotten pushback on that people maybe have disagreed with you on?
I think if I had to pick the one that I've gotten the most pushback on, that has surprised me the most, is that mentally strong parents don't make their child the center of the universe. And that's one that I wasn't expecting to hear a lot of comments from, but I had written the article, The 13 Things Mentally Strong Parents Don't Do, and I think there were some misconceptions from parents who said, no, your kids should be your top priority and your world should revolve around your kids. And while I agree clearly that when you become a parent, your life needs to change and your kids need to be a top priority, they shouldn't be your only priority. And that your entire universe shouldn't be about what do the kids want for dinner, where do the kids want to go on Saturday afternoon. And when parents cater too much to kids and kids get everything they want, then they grow up and really struggle in the real world. And so that chapter is really about how do you still, as a parent, how do you still have your own interests and activities, and how do you get your kids involved in stuff they don't necessarily want to do? How do you raise them to be well-rounded individuals who know that the entire world doesn't revolve around them?
So my 7-year-old has started saying no fair, and my guess is that I'm not the only parent experiencing that. What are some ways that we can help teach our kids that life isn't quite fair?
Well, I think that I hear a lot of parents who will say, well, when their child says life isn't fair, or that's not fair, they'll say, yes, it is, or that's too bad. But I think it's important to have conversations with kids that says, you're right. Sometimes bad things happen to us or things we don't want to happen. And how do you deal with that? And so rather than arguing with them that, yes, life is fair, or to minimize their feelings, you can say, yeah, I bet you feel really sad about that you didn't get to do this thing you really wanted to do. Or I know you're really angry that we're not going to go to the playground today because it's raining out, or your brother got a bigger piece of candy than you did, or whatever it is. But to have those conversations about their emotions, validate their feelings, and then talk about what their choices are. What can you do when you feel like things aren't fair? Well, you could whine about it, but does that help, or does that make things worse? Or when things aren't fair, could you color a picture? Can you go outside and play? Can you how can you cope with your emotions like that? Or when do you need to stand up for yourself? So if somebody is being treated unfairly, they're being picked on, or being bullied, then to teach your child too. When do you speak up, and when do you stay quiet? When should you say, okay, that's not fair and I need to speak up for myself, or maybe I need to stand up for someone else? So I think there's lots of opportunities for teachable moments around the idea of fairness.
Well, when you were in high school, you played sports. You were a 3-sport athlete in high school. And as a coach, I was always trying to teach and emphasize mental toughness. How do you think you would have received some of this mental toughness training if your coach tried to teach it to you as an athlete?
Oh, it would have been so helpful. I'm thinking about softball, for example, when you step up to the plate and maybe you have 2 strikes on you. What's the conversations that you have with yourself in that moment? And that's what's going to make all the difference. Or when you're on the basketball court and you make a mistake, what do you tell yourself? How do you bounce back from that mistake? Because it's, again, the thoughts that we have influence how we feel, and that influences how we behave. So to figure out how do you have more productive and helpful conversations to bounce back from failure and to rebound from mistakes, and to do your best when you're in those moments that you feel like, okay, I've got one shot, I'm on the foul line, it's a tie game. What do you say to yourself in those moments that will enhance your performance rather than hold you back? So it would have been incredibly helpful to have this information back then. If I could only go back in high school and know what I know now, I bet I could have done a lot better.
So when is your book coming out for 13 Things Mentally Tough Athletes Don't Do?
That's a great question, because I do get a fair amount of questions from people, whether they're elite athletes who are headed for the Olympics, or just high school coaches, or even little league coaches who say, how do we teach this to kids? So I would love to take that spin on it someday and talk about how do you do this stuff when it comes to sports and athletes and coaching other people with their performance.
Well, eventually you'll have a whole series. It'll be like the Chicken Soup
right.
and the Soul books. It'll be a whole series.
That'd be great.
You have the books. There's a lot of stuff online. People can watch you. But you also have, if people want to dive deeper into this, you also have some stuff online, an e-course. Tell us a little bit about why this might be of interest to some people.
Well, I wanted to give people a little bit more. Sometimes people who have read the book said, what else can I do? Or I have a lot of people who just say, I don't really sit and read books. I need something more interactive. So I created the course as an opportunity to do that. And I also get people who will ask a lot about whether I do therapy online, which I don't do. And so I wanted to give them sort of an alternative. And it's a way for them to go through. There's a workbook, there's interactive things that they can do, there's even a couple of games in there, but there's ways to then say, how do I apply these certain mental strength principles to my situation? So whether somebody is an athlete or somebody is trying to be mentally stronger in the workplace or just in general, I wanted to present the material in a way that would make it come alive for people. So there's lectures that are really short. They're only a few minutes long, because I know our attention spans aren't long enough to sit through 3-hour-long lectures these days. So they're just lectures and ideas and interactive graphics and ways to really make the idea of mental strength come to life, so that you can then say, how do I apply this to my personal situation?
So you have e-courses where you help others, and you have these books where you're helping others. What are you doing to ensure that you continue to grow and kind of fill up your tank as well?
It's important for me to make sure that I don't just work 24/7. I want to make sure that I have a rich and full life. And I realized a few years ago, too, if I'm going to do a lot of writing, I also need to make sure I'm doing a lot of living. I can't just keep writing about things unless I'm also out there doing stuff. And so about a year ago, we decided to move to the Florida Keys. I was living in Maine where it was cold and dark a lot of the year. So my current husband and I decided let's go live on a boat in the Florida Keys. So now I'm on my boat as we speak. And I go on these adventures and try to say, how do you go hang out with the dolphins and swim with manatees and do crazy things that are filling up my tank, so I feel like I have plenty to give to other people too.
Well, being on a boat is a pretty nice thing right now. That's a nice little office for you.
It is. I find it, quite nice to be on the ocean and in the nice warm weather in the middle of the winter. I can't complain at all.
Well, a boat is a nice gift and it's a nice purchase, but has there been a purchase of $100 or less that you've done that's had a big impact on your life?
I think a really simple one that's had a big impact is noise-canceling headphones, especially when I'm traveling. If I'm on a flight and I want to do some work, or I just want to fall asleep, or if I go to a hotel that's noisy, I can put on my noise-canceling headphones and get back to being in my own little world.
Now, I just saw a story on the news last night about George Clooney going on an international flight and in first class, and he took his new kid, his baby, and he gave noise-canceling headphones to all the people in first class with his logo on it, with his wine logo or whatever on it. So that was a little gift for them.
That's funny.
Who would you like to meet or spend time with that you don't currently know?
I think as of right now, I would pick Angela Duckworth. I'd love to sit down and talk to her about her research on grit.
What is a book or a podcast that you would definitely recommend or that you're currently reading right now?
James Altucher's podcast. I was a guest on his show a couple of times, but I'm a big fan of the guests that he has. He puts out podcast episodes all the time about lots of different topics. So I would say his podcast is one of my favorite things to listen to while I'm running.
What reality show would you like to be on if you could be on one?
Survivor. See if we could put the mental strength to the test and see how it works on that show.
Well, you do a lot of entrepreneurial business activities. Is there a productivity tool or an app that you would have a hard time living without?
I'm pretty low tech for the most part. I use a paper calendar and a notebook to do a lot of things to keep me productive because I don't want a lot of bells and whistles going off while I'm writing. And so as long as I have a notebook and a pen, I'm usually pretty good to go.
Are you a sticky note person?
I don't do much with sticky notes because they end up everywhere and they fall off. So I'm talking just a 5-star notebook that I buy at the store and sit down with that. And that's how I organize my monthly schedule and my ideas about what I'm going to write about. And each chapter of my book, that's about it.
Nice. If you could be anything or do anything other than, what you're currently doing, what would that be?
I think I would talk to people about how to make money online. I meet a lot of people who are interested in doing something a little different or having a side hustle. And before I became an author, I had a couple of online side hustles, and I know there's tons of opportunities out there. So, and I get questions about it all the time because I speak about it a little bit. So I would love to also talk to people about that and teach them how to do it. What
is your next book that you have in the works?
13 Things Mentally Strong Women Don't Do. It'll probably come out in January of 2019. I'm writing it as we speak.
Excellent. Look forward to that, to give it to my wife. Not to read it myself, of course. What would be a favorite quote or a little bit of parting wisdom you would have?
I would say your mind can be your best asset or your worst enemy, and it's important to train it well.
Where can people connect with you or find out more about what you're doing, Amy?
My website is Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed clinical social worker.com. And on there I have links to my articles and my books and all the other work that I do.
Well, we'll be sure to put those in the show notes so people can connect with you. There's lots of videos, lots of podcasts you've been on, interviews, all different kinds of things, and they can learn about that. Definitely highly recommend the books. I was telling Amy offline that I would have definitely used the book when I was coaching. So lots of good things in there, whether you're a coach, educator, business person, or just, you want to be more mentally tough. So great words. I appreciate your time, Amy. Great story. Thanks for your time.
Well, thanks for having me.
What an inspiration Amy's story can be for all of us. We all face ups and downs and our fair share of challenges in life, but she has some insights that can really help us take the right mental approach and perspective. I love her positivity and her attitude. Remember also to download her free audiobook from our friends at Audible by going to audibletrial.com/success is a choice. Thanks for listening today, and if you haven't yet done so, please take just a quick second to hit that little subscribe button. We don't want you to miss out on our great future episodes just like this one with Amy. Thanks again, and until next time, remember that success is a choice. What choice will you make today?